Welcome back. We have been implementing some movement capabilities such as crouching, running, sprinting, jumping, all of that good stuff. And in this video, we're just going to polish up a few of the parameters before we move on to new things. So the first thing I'd like to take a look at is we have our zoom in when we're aiming, and it looks like we're a little bit low. So we moved our socket offset for the spring arm down a little bit. What I'd like to do is move that back up a little and actually move it back so that we see more of the character. So that's the first thing I want to do. So let's go back and take a look at the C++ code for the shooter character. We're here in shooterCharacter.cpp, and in the constructor, here's our socket offset, and it used to be at 70. I think I'm going to put this up a little bit, maybe 65 or even back up to 70. And I'll go ahead and increase the target arm length here. So in order to experiment with the target arm length, I'm going to experiment with this in Blueprints and see how that feels. So as I compile this code, I'm going to go back into the editor and open up our character, shooter character BP, and we're going to select the camera boom and open up the viewport here with the camera boom selected, and let's take a look at socket offset here and target arm length. So target arm length is 180. If I go ahead and increase this, I'm going to put it back to about, say, 238, 240, and let's hit play and see how this feels. And actually, I'm going to hit stop and undock the blueprint and dock it back up. That way, when we hit play, we'll get our own window here. And now we see the entire character, which is good. And when I zoom in, we get a little bit more zoomed in. Now I think I'm a little too far to the right and a little bit too low. So for our socket offset, I'm going to take our Y and increase that a bit, maybe to 65 or 70. And then for the Z, I'm going to increase this up to maybe 80. Let's see how this feels. And it looks like I pushed myself to the right even farther. I meant to go a little closer to the character. So rather than the Y increasing, let's decrease it down to about 35, 40, and then see how that feels. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I'd kind of like us to zoom in a little bit more. So let's take a look at our field of view variable. If we scroll up, we'll see we have a camera zoomed FOV, and that's set to 35. Now, if we look in shooterCharacter.h and search for FOV, you'll see that we did not expose these to blueprints, so we can't experiment with them. So if we make them edit anywhere, then we can suddenly experiment with them in blueprints. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this uProperty macro here, because it's edit anywhere, blueprint read write. And I'm going to change the default camera FOV to be edit anywhere. I'm going to change the camera zoomed FOV to be edit anywhere. And we don't need current camera FOV to be exposed, so I'm going to leave that as is, and I'll go ahead and compile this. Okay, we've compiled. Now I'm back here in the editor. I'm going to choose shooter character BP self so that I can search for FOV. And here's the camera default FOV and the camera zoomed FOV. I'm going to decrease the zoomed FOV to about 20, and let's see how this looks. And now we're zooming in a great deal more, so that looks good. Okay, that's looking good. Another thing I think is a little bit dramatic is the change in look sensitivity when we're aiming. So I can look around just fine when we're not aiming, and then as soon as I'm aiming, I really have to move the mouse a lot to aim. So that's a little bit too low of a look sensitivity. Now if we go back to our Visual Studio project and we look in our constructor here, we'll see that we have turn rates for aiming and not aiming. We have our aiming, turn, and lookup rates for, this is used for the console controller, and then we have a different factor for the mouse. It looks like we made this factor 0.2 for when we're aiming, which is 20% of the normal look sensitivity. Now, if we look at mouse aiming turn rate in shooterCharacter.h, I'm going to search for mouse aiming, we'll see that we have edit defaults only, so we can edit this on the blueprint. So I'm going to go back into the blueprint and I'm going to type in mouse, and we'll see we have mouse aiming turn rate and mouse aiming lookup rate. I'm going to increase these. So they're 0.2 right now. I'm going to increase them to about 0.6. So when we're aiming, our look sensitivity is about 60% rather than 20%. And I think that feels a lot better. And now that I'm doing this, I'm realizing that the zoom in FOV might be actually a little bit too low. We might be zooming in a little too much. So I'm going to go ahead and change that just a bit. So I'm going to search for FOV again. And for camera zoomed FOV, I'll put this up to 25. All right, let's see how this looks. I think that feels pretty good. Okay, so we've got a couple of new values. So for camera zoomed FOV, I like the value of 25. So in Visual Studio, in the constructor, I'm going to give that default value a value of 25. So camera zoomed FOV, we'll change this to 25. Now, we also changed the mouse aiming turn rate and lookup rate to 0.6. So let's change those in our C++ constructor. Here they are. Instead of 0.2, I'm going to make these 0.6. Now let's also take a look at the aiming turn rate for when we are aiming with the console controller. So I'm going to hit play and I'm going to go ahead and get my console controller here. Here we go. And I'm going to aim. And that seems to be okay. So I think I'm okay with this rate for when we're aiming. But if you would like to change it, go ahead and tweak it as you see fit. Now, another thing I'd like to change is when I aim, I don't like the angle of the weapon. Notice that the weapon is tilted a little bit. Looks like we could rotate it a little. That's because we are morphing a little bit of the standing aiming pose and the hip pose. And the hip pose, I think, has the weapon tilted a bit. So when we're aiming, I'd like this weapon to be a bit more straight. So if we go back into our animation blueprint, shooter anim BP, and we take a look at our anim graph, we'll see that we have a state machine called aiming upper body, and we'll double click this, and here we have our aiming pose. I'm going to double click on that, and if we zoom in a bit, we'll see here that this is her aiming animation. It's actually looking like the weapon is tilted in this animation. And so I'd kind of like to alter this animation a bit so it's not so tilted. Now, a good rule of thumb when you're altering animations is to make a copy so that you have the original, and if you screw up the copy, well then you at least have the original animation that you can come back and use later. So this one is called aiming pose. I'm going to right click and browse to asset, and we have it here in our character animations folder. It looks like we've already copied this off of one of the Bellica animations. I'm going to right click and just duplicate this one. And I'm going to call this aiming pose underscore rotated because we're going to rotate the weapon just a bit. Open aiming pose rotated. Now click on skeleton tree and we're going to actually alter this so that this gun is not so tilted. So let's go ahead and actually get back to the point of view where we would be aiming. So that's about like this. And so I'm going to go ahead and select one of the bones on the right arm. Let's give the right hand a try. So let's click on hand R, and I'm going to make sure snapping is not on for rotating. And I'm going to just rotate it up just a bit like this. Make sure that the hand itself doesn't look unnatural. So that's looking pretty good. And I'm also going to use the blue widget and the green widget as well so that it's not angled so high up. So that is starting to look a little bit better. Okay, so after rotating it a bit and adding a key and saving, I'm going to go back and play test this and aim. And now it looks good. I think that is a pretty good angle. But of course, if you'd like it to be angled a little differently, you can change it to how you see fit. So that will take care of the gun angle when aiming. So that looks good as well. Okay, so that is going to conclude this video. This video was just a bunch of tweaks that we did to some of our parameters to make sure that we've got the game looking and feeling the way we want it to. And of course, you don't have to use the same values that I'm using. You can use values that you find appropriate for your game.